Okay, we're going to get started on the next panel now. This panel is going to be focused on compliant donor agreements with foundations and others. You might see two familiar faces on this panel, but notice that we've made them switch places in order to make it seem like a brand new panel. So hopefully that has fooled some of you during the entire process. So with me, of course, and I won't make them introduce themselves for the 12th time, is Erin Atkins, former Erin Fox, soon to be something else that she's not going to tell you until really later this month.
Onboarded, you know.
Yeah, till you're onboarded. And Bob Clark of Clark Law. So we're going to be talking about something pretty important. So I think in order to maintain independence for charities in this space, and in order for manufacturers to be compliant with the OIG opinions that are out there, donation agreements have to be set up in a manner that's going to be conducive to that. I can say at Healthwell, just to use my own sample set, I would say maybe 40 to 45% of all the donation agreements that we sign are from using our template agreement. 40 to 45% might be from the manufacturer side. Then we have about 10% of the donors who would rather not go under any agreement because they are donating to a charity and they just see it as a typical charitable donation and don't want to necessarily memorialize that in an agreement. So that being said, I think we want to make sure that the take-home from this panel is, if you do an agreement, which we probably think is the right approach in most cases, what should that agreement look like? What are some key factors that should be in there? And the panelists here certainly, I would say, have looked at agreements probably in the hundreds, if not thousands, of different ones, and have been able to get a huge sample set as to what to do and what not to do, and some things that they've seen that are different in these types of agreements than other what you might think would be like agreements would have. So first question along the way is, what are, from a bare bones skeleton perspective, what are some of the 3, 4, 5 different parameters in an agreement that should be addressed where both sides agree to do X, Y, or Z?
Sorry about that. So I'm going to say something that might be controversial. Can't imagine that at this exciting panel. I actually think that a donation agreement may not really be necessary, and it goes differently by foundation. This is just my personal opinion. Okay, so this is not legal advice to you. This is just my own personal opinion, having lived through the years of the CIAs and the investigations. At the end of the day, number one, keep in mind this concept of independence that we really tried to hammer home on the last panel. You as a foundation, you are your own organization, you operate independently, and you have your own ways of doing business, right, that are not dependent on or beholden to or taken direction from your donors. So that's point number one. Point number two, as a nonprofit, I made the point that it's not always apples to apples when we're talking about other industries versus the healthcare industry. This is one area where I think we can draw some parallels. If you make a donation to your charity of choice, Diabetes Association or a local food bank in your community, okay, what do you receive in return? You receive a thank you letter that's maybe a few sentences long that says, "Thank you, Mr. Klein, for your very generous donation. Thank you very much. This is tax deductible," period. Now, obviously, in our space, there are other issues that might need to be addressed. But our point is, Alan's not going to sign a contract that has a termination provision or a choice of law provision or all of those boilerplate things that as attorneys we might put in other commercial contracts. It's not a commercial transaction, it's a donation. And I think if you can keep that in mind, that's really important. Now, being said, there are some points that are absolutely appropriate to have in these types of arrangements. First of all, I don't like to call them agreements or contracts, and I certainly don't like having, when I represent a foundation, the foundation being referred to as a vendor or a client. Again, we're trying to maintain our independence. And if you have a contract with someone, how independent are you? It's these kind of esoteric questions that keep me up at night, which shows how I need to kind of get a life. But think about it. You know, like Healthwell is not providing services for a donor. They're providing services for their patients and for their own organization, but they're not providing services to a donor. So, you know, even those types of very minute things like language and how you define terms can be important in establishing your independence as an independent foundation. Alan has mentioned, and we already know from the OIG, that it's completely appropriate for a donor to say, I would like for this donation to be used for your breast cancer fund or what have you. They can do that. And it's reasonable to think that they would want that memorialized. That's fine. Foundations are allowed to take what's called an admin fee because as we've all heard, administering these funds is costly. It takes employees. So it's totally appropriate to say in the agreement, okay, well, we'll thank you very much for your donation, and we'll take whatever 2%, whatever it is, as our administration fee. That's completely fine to memorialize. Other things I like to see in there are statements of compliance. That the donor understands that the donor is going to comply with the anti-kickback statute, that they realize that Healthwell has an advisory opinion that they are going to comply with, kind of reps and warranties, basically, standard reps and warranties. We're all in good standing. If you're the foundation, I'm a 501c3 incorporated under Maryland or what have you.
You sound like an agreement now.
But that's really about it. That's really about it. Like it can really be really short. Like it could literally be 2 pages. I've seen some of these agreements that are like 30, 40 pages. And to me, that says there's a lack of education on probably the donor side. They probably think, oh, well, these guys are my vendor. These guys are going to provide a service to patients taking my drug. That's where some of the educational component can come back in. Bob?
Yeah. I hear you. And agree with most of it.
Understood.
I'm an agreement guy. I want to make sure that my arrangement with the donor is clearly delineated in writing. Certainly, the major points are, who the donor is, what the donation is for, how much of that can be used as an administrative fee. I like to see, and I try to balance between the interests of the donor and the interest of the organization, because I know, they have legal departments, and legal departments like to see agreements most of the time.
They do.
It's changing because, just throw the money over the transom and that's fine. Just give us the money. I get that. But from my perspective, all of those things, I think it's important to have a representation and warranty that neither party has been excluded from participation in a federal health care program or the like. Non-exclusion, that's a biggie, that they have authority to enter into the arrangement, and those kinds of things. And I like to see, in the interests of my client as a 501c3, I like to see a limitation of liability. We have the agreement, and we make certain representations and warranties about complying with the advisory opinion and things like that. But if something goes sideways and the organization I'm representing, not HealthWell, somehow gets zinged by the government, gets a subpoena, gets a CIA, and is determined to have engaged in some sort of activity, I don't want my liability to be limitless. I want, you're donating $1 million to this, my client's organization. Under any circumstances, you're not getting more than $1 million in damages or remedies from this particular organization. I like to see that. And again, donors like to be notified in the event that the organization has received a subpoena, has been indicted, or things like that. You see that a lot in the agreements these days, and I get the interest in having something like that in there. So there's sort of a menu of things, and again, most of the things that I see in the agreements, or I like in the agreements, track what's in the OIG advisory opinion. Independence. We're independent. You don't have any influence, all those kinds of things. Although you can reference the advisory opinion, a lot of organizations and donors like to see that sort of in there and laid out clearly.
Another thing we didn't mention is data sharing.
Yeah.
So that is another one that's critical. Even if you have a very bare bones letter, you need to include some sort of acknowledgement that we, the foundation, are limited in the amount of data that we can provide you, and just go ahead and put what it says in your opinion. We are only allowed to report to you whatever your opinion says, the number of applicants, the number of I'm forgetting all the elements now, but it's like the number of applicants, maybe if there's money left, the amount of money,
Grants.
the grants from the fund. But there are just like 2 or 3 data elements that as foundations you're allowed to provide to the donor.
Yeah.
And I would be explicit about that, because especially if you're dealing with a donor new to the space, or maybe a smaller pharma company, or maybe just new people in that department who haven't learned the rules, you're going to get pushed. And this is where things can go wrong. And this is what we've seen in the prior CIAs, unfortunately, where the foundations felt like, well, I have to comply with what's in this agreement. They're asking me for all this information. I'm going to risk losing the donation if I don't give them this information. They're kind of put between a rock and a hard place, but at the end of the day, your opinion is very clear. So absolutely address the data. The data in your agreement.
Well, also the opinion is for the target organization.
Right.
That opinion is not issued to a donor. So in the OIG advisory opinion, there are things that the CPAP is told that the donors are not allowed to do, but how do you bind a donor to not doing those? For example, disclosing to the public the donation. So to me, having an agreement with a provision like that, and it is a hook and an obligation on the part of the donor to do what we're told the donor cannot do under the arrangement. So, there's a number of things. And again, the scope of the program audit. Talked about program audits earlier. We in the template we like to be clear is exactly what the program audit is covering and what is being audited. And we've, over the course of the last several years, that has evolved to include things because, donors want to make sure certain aspects of that are of the organization's operations are audited. And it's important that they see that in black and white, and that they're going to get an audit report every year. So those kinds of things are important.
You're right.
Yeah, for me, this is very heartening to have a slight difference of opinion. It's almost like doing a legal panel with Sonny and Cher. So,
That's probably the greatest compliment of my life.
yeah, I'm full of them.
I hope I'm Cher.
Yeah, yes.
Well, I'm Sonny, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know what that makes me. Maybe I'm chastity, so I don't know what that means. So,
I got you, baby.
yeah. This is being video recorded, by the way. It's just
Well, that was their song.
yeah, I know.
That's right.
I know.
We know our material.
Well, karaoke night is tomorrow, so I encourage everybody to join us there. So actually, that's a great point about what we're allowed to share. We actually, just as best practice, we actually cut and paste what we're allowed to share from our OIG opinion right into the donation agreements that we put in. And so we know that we're complying with exactly what the government has intended for us to do. So it is very important. So I think what I've seen that the manufacturers, donors should get out of any agreement should be the money should be going as intended to the fund that they wish to donate to. And that if there's really any change in your status, be it you lose your OIG opinion or your C3 status, there's an information portion of the agreement to let them know that that's happened, so they can kind of plan appropriately there. But other than that, it should be the intent of, as I read it, the intent of the space is that they are literally, as Krista often says, lobbing money over a fence and then not having any look through as to how it's being utilized, with the exception of it's going to certain patient disease areas.
And I would make that mutual. I mean, if you as a foundation are agreeing to say, you know, we are a 501c3 in good standing, no one here has been excluded or debarred, I would want the donor to represent the same thing back to me.
Exactly.
We have not been excluded or debarred. And even on the receipt of a subpoena or investigation, that's very common in some of the agreements that I've seen where the donor wants to know if the foundation is being investigated. Well, it goes both ways.
Yes.
I mean, that's one area where I think you can legitimately say, we want to know the same about you. Now, keep in mind, a manufacturer can receive an investigation or a subpoena for a million different things. Maybe it's like related to an FDA issue. Maybe you don't necessarily need to know about that, but something germane to the donation relationship,
Yes,
you would
I
want to know about. You know, you're not trying to get in all their business, right? But the subject matter of, you know, being able to make a donation to a charity, if they were being investigated regarding that, I would want to know.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And also audit rights.
Yes.
Donor audit rights. A lot of larger donors want to have the right to audit. And I want to put in there, you know, certain obligations they have. If they're going to have a third-party auditor come in there and audit the operations, I want that third-party auditor's got to have a confidentiality arrangement in place with the organization, that sort of thing. But you see that more often. And then it's interruptive to the operations to have several audits by several different donors, but as part of the game, it seems to be these days.
Can we talk just a minute more about audits? Because that's really, really important. So don't forget, under your OIG advisory opinion, you know, going back to the data you're limited in providing. I've seen some donors try to use the audit function as a way to kind of maybe get around some of those restrictions, particularly if the donor is doing the audit themselves, right? It hasn't happened much, but I've seen it just a handful of times. So the standard is, if there's going to be an audit, you use a third party, you use an outside entity. And like Bob says, that entity has to understand there are certain things you cannot report back to. Technically, you know, the person who's paying you to do the audit, the manufacturer is paying this third party to do an audit, that's fine. But there are still things that auditor cannot report back to the donor because the donor is in possession of that information. So maybe you're wearing me down, Bob. So maybe maybe you're wearing me down.
You're watching history
Sonny.
being made in real time. So thank you very much.
So
Say, babe.
so the audit issue can be a little sticky, and you need to look at that carefully. Yeah.
Agreed. Also, what happens with the funds? Say for some reason or other, a fund is discontinued or the organization has to shut down. We've seen the example, based upon government action. A donor has contributed $1 million to the organization and there's $500,000 left over for some reason or other, and the organization is not in a position to use it for a particular fund. How do we deal with that? That's can be sort of sticky, because on the one hand, you're going to have the desire of the donor to maybe get the money back, which seems to be inconsistent with the fact that it's a donation to an organization that has the right to use it any way it wants. Or do you have an agreement that the donor and the organization will discuss and determine how to best use those funds for a charitable purpose, or what? So that's something that is germane to be addressed in an agreement, I think.
I'm very anti those clawback clauses. Very, very anti that, because it really gets to the heart of the relationship. In an ideal situation, let's say you as a foundation decide to close a fund. Let's not go down the road of you're going out of business.
Right.
Let's just say we have this fund. It hasn't been utilized. We've still got $700,000 left in this fund. It is my personal opinion, and how I would counsel a client is that is your money. Even though it was given to you for a specific fund, you still have a charitable purpose. You could even put in your agreement, you've earmarked this for our breast cancer fund. I doubt a breast cancer fund would ever be closed, but let's just use this for example. You could put a statement in there that says, and I frequently do, this money is to be used by and under the discretion and control of the foundation. If not for the fund, then for some related charitable purpose. It could go into the foundation's general fund. Like a lot of foundations have a general fund that's not disease specific. And sometimes they use those for like transportation services or other kind of like non-disease specific grants. You could have a statement in there that says, should this fund close, any remaining money will go to our general fund. That at least gives the donor some comfort of knowing where it's going, rather than saying just for some, random charitable purpose. But it's my opinion. Once they give you the money, it's yours.
I think that's right. I mean, although I don't recall ever having a situation where that happened.
Right.
I
Hopefully
guess
it's
that's
rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there an agreement?
No, yes, it has happened. It has
Yeah.
happened. In the other unfortunate situation. In the
Okay.
unfortunate situation, yeah.
Oh
where
yes, that's true.
Others
I
have
remember that
told
case
it, yeah.
actually. Yes, it's
The
like
better
cold
part
case
of
files.
discretion is that it should go to some other charitable purpose. And conferring with the donor, I don't have any problem with that, but I think ultimately it should be up to the 501c3 to determine what happens with those funds. And, as part of the 501c3's charter and IRS regulations, particularly what we weren't focusing on it, when an organization ceases operations, the funds have to be used for a charitable purpose.
That's right.
Might go back to the donors.
So we have only a few minutes left. I just want to ask one broad general question. A lot of the donor agreements that we have kind of outline some of the business terms associated with it, including tranching of payments to the foundation. Is there any business terms other than something that may be idiosyncratic to the foundations that you might be advising, that you would advise generally that donors or manufacturers stay away from trying to negotiate with a foundation? And we spent all of this time talking about the legalese that should be in, which is exactly what we should be talking about. But a lot of the folks who might be watching also are concerned about some of the business terms and whether or not the business ask that they're asking might be somewhat onerous and could be deemed to be non-compliant?
Well, I think it just comes to mind something that we faced earlier in talking about the naivete of some donors. It's not a sponsorship, right? I mean, it's not a sponsorship agreement. We're not receiving the money, the donation to give any kind of benefit to that organization. No accolades, no benefits, and we've received sponsorship agreements that have specifically said, you know, in return for your receipt of these funds, you will do this. And that's like, no, it's not happening.
That's right.
So that's a business term. Anything related to that, you will want to avoid, like the plague or COVID or whatever it is.
Yes.
You know, the disease du jour. And so you might have some ideas as well, Aaron.
I've absolutely seen situations where the foundation will receive what is clearly a sponsorship agreement. And that might happen for a number of reasons. Usually the most common reason is a lack of education on the side of the manufacturer. And it sometimes it can be a quick call with you. Other times, put it on your lawyers. Like, let your lawyers be the one that have to go back. If you don't want to get into the middle of that relationship, I understand. That's why you have us, you know.
Yeah.
And we can explain, look, guys, this isn't a sponsorship, and here's why. And I refer you back to our OIG opinion. You can do it in a very, you know, non-confrontational way. But again, I've seen these sponsorship agreements that are requiring the foundation to give the donor a budget. No, they don't. That's not germane, not appropriate. And most times it's just because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
They think that they're buying a booth at a conference, or, you know, some sort of name recognition at a conference or an educational event. They just don't get it. So put that on your lawyers to pick up the phone and educate them a little bit there.
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Great. I know we have a couple of minutes till lunch begins. So any questions? I saw Jonathan's hand raised. No, you're good? Fran Costello. Excellent. Please.
So you touched on it, the donor audit provisions, and I'm not saying they're not a way of life. What is your legal opinion on them, knowing that most of our donation agreements already include the obligation to provide an external audit that our board hires, and we have to give the report to said donor as part of that donation term? So the utility of the donor audit and your sense on them.
I would lead with that, Fran. If your organization already does their own internal audits, which, you know, hopefully all foundations do, and that it's something that you report to your board, I would kind of push back to the donor and say, look, we do an internal audit. We can share a redacted version, or, you know, whatever kind of I've had some clients that have like the version of their audit report that goes to the board, and then a second version of the same audit report, essentially, that has been scrubbed and could be appropriate for sharing with either the donor, or put it on your website, the public, you know. So like I would kind of push back at first and say, there's only so much you can look at. You know, there's only so much that we can allow you to see. This should be sufficient. And then if they push, then I think that's where you involve your council or board members or leadership as to, you know, you really will have to get into the weeds. Like, you really have got to know what they're going to be looking for. And sometimes this is a situation where you say, I'm sorry, we can't. Bob?
Yeah, insofar as legality, I don't think it's illegal to agree to a third-party audit, although there are ramifications that could lead you into very deep waters insofar as disclosure of information they're not entitled to. So you have to have those protections, of course. And I mean, if the donor is such that you can convince them to not do the audit, that would be great. But, you know, there are donors and there are donors. And there are relationships. And I'm not talking about coordinating or anything like that. But if you have a donor that's giving you $500 million a year and they want to do an audit and they insist on it and you say, well, we have to have certain parameters, chances are you're going to try to find out a way to be able to do it. But they are annoying, time-consuming, they divert resources from more important tasks. And like I said, if you can get away with avoiding it, that'd be great.
Thanks.
I'm shielding the majority of 5 questions over here from
Yes.
being able to have the microphone. So I just
Yes.
want to
One
give
question
you
with 5
a sense of rest
Yes,
before I
thank
go
you.
forth. No, but I do have a question in some donor agreements, and I'm just asking the question. I've seen some in maybe in that would basically give some limitation to when the program is complete. There's a donation that's made, and the program is complete. All remaining funds go into the general fund. Is that something that, I mean, I understand the tensions. We're spending every penny that's in there, and we need, twice as much when it's over. But I mean, is that something worth consideration of putting into a donation agreement that would give you some sort of catch-all phrase that just says, hey, look, once this term of this program has been, it's a year, it's 2 years, it's whatever the term of the program could be. And I've seen that in maybe other areas that might be not as appropriate here. So I'm just asking.
You're touching on a lot of things.
I know,
That one
sorry.
question,
Yeah.
you gave us a 5-part question anyway.
It was.
Trying so hard.
It was.
I mean, in my opinion, the only time you should address finality is if the fund has to close or if your business has to go out of business.
Yep.
That's why I don't like these term and termination provisions in a donation agreement, because there is no term to a donation. You make the donation. Maybe next year you make another donation. Like, a donor can make as many donations as they want, as many times during the year. Like, it's not a services agreement. Like, there's no term. That's so. Like, when you say when the program is complete, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's
not
never
complete.
complete. It should never be complete as long as you are in existence and you have a fund that's open, or not even open, but as long as you are maintaining a fund, it's never over
Yeah.
until you literally
Yeah,
shut
I
off
mean,
the lights.
I would add to that. Basically, even if all the funding is exhausted, I'm still out there trying to raise more funds to reopen the fund. So basically, it's not complete. And we have grants that have 12 to 15 month tails anyway. So even after the last grant is done, that fund is still active for 12 to 15 months.
I mean, they could say we will make one donation per calendar year. They could say that, but that's completely different than the scenario that you posed. And that, again, it just goes back to the independence. You're not providing a service for this donor. You're providing a service for your patients, and that never ends, unfortunately.
I generally agree with that. I mean, you have provisions and agreements that say, this, it will be another donation will be made in 12 months or whatever on an annual basis. And although the donor has a right to not make the donation and withdraw it, it's sort of optically, for an organization to have that in the agreement and say, well, you said you'd give us another grant this year. Has something changed? So, I mean, it's, while not enforceable, it could provide some leverage in negotiations. But I think for me, the bottom line area of importance that if for whatever reason there are funds remaining that are beyond what was needed for the initial donation, that it has to be used in a manner consistent with the charitable mission and purpose of the organization, whatever that may be. That way, you don't get in hot water with your 501c3 status and related matters.
I just have one question. So in the situation where obviously we're not letting donors publish, their situation, but what if the same donor that's a donor is also a sponsor in another area? That they're a sponsor of an event or or this educational activity, this whatever it might be, where publication is appropriate as part of a sponsorship agreement, but they're also a donor. Is there any concern about public perception, and is that an issue at all? Is that just if they happen to do both, does anyone care?
It would be absolutely inappropriate for a foundation to say, and thanks to X Pharma for funding our copay program. So that's absolutely not. If you had a conference like HealthWell, or any other, I'm thinking of other organizations that have like a research and advocacy side versus their copay side, it's okay to acknowledge sponsors for sponsorships of events, but you have to make clear what you're acknowledging, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, specific to the sponsorship of the event and not tied to a donation. And also, I don't think we mentioned it, the public disclosure, there are exceptions for donors. I mean, there are certain filings that donors have to make, IRS filings and public filings where, notwithstanding the prohibition on disclosure of a donation, there are certain instances where they are required by law to make a disclosure, and the public is able to see that.
But that's not you.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
That's right. Well, I want to thank everybody and send you off to lunch and look forward to seeing you in the afternoon. Take care.